You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 15th of February. Coronation Street star charged with child rape. Catch me if you can. French far-right leader to speak in Cambridge. Macedonia, illegal mosques financed by Saudis springing up near you. Small bomb targets Greek far-right party office in Piraeus. Frenchman self-immolates over unemployment benefits. Germany, Muslims plan to convert Hamburg church into mosque. Nick Griffin MEP on climate change, the Green Week and Arthur Redfearn. Pat Robinson claims Islam is demonic and not a religion but an economic system. Muslim infiltration in public education. Thought for the day, our nearest and dearest. And finally, something fishy going on. UK News. Coronation Street's Michael Lavelle charged with child rape. Michael Turner, aka Michael Lavelle, Coronation Street Kevin Webster, faces 19 charges relating to sexual offences committed between 2001 and 2010, and charges include the rape of a child. Alison Levitt, QC, Principal Legal Advisor to the Director of Public Prosecutions, said she had reviewed a decision not to prosecute Mr Lavelle following allegations made against him in 2011. She said, "I have very carefully reviewed the evidence in this case and I have concluded that there is sufficient evidence and it is in the public interest to charge Michael Robert Turner with a number of sexual offences. I have authorised Greater Manchester Police to charge Mr Turner with 19 offences, including rape of a child. Mr Turner has now been charged with criminal offences and has a right to a fair trial." Catch me if you can. Violent criminal on the run from police talks officers on Facebook with string of pictures of him breaking the law. A violent thug who is on the run from police has been poking fun at their attempts to catch him on Facebook, saying, "Catch me if you can." Fugitive Alan Watkins, 24, began taunting officers after an urgent appeal for information as to his whereabouts was posted on Gwent's Police's Facebook page. Watkins even posted this appeal on his own page, boasting, "Wow, I'm on the Gwent Police site. You catch me if you can. Do your effing job." As well as his mocking posts, Watkins has also posted a picture of himself apparently urinating upon a police car. A nationalist spokesperson states, "What a charmer." French far-right leader to speak in Cambridge. The leader of a far-right party and the editor of a broadsheet newspaper have been added to the Cambridge Union's line-up. Marine Le Pen, MEP, leader of the French Front National and former French presidential candidate, will be speaking at a debating society at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, February the 19th. A World at 8 writer comments, "That's fine and dandy, but why is our chairman Nick Griffin continually denied the Oxford debate, question time and other airtime? Ms Le Pen has voiced very similar views. This reeks of duplicity on our authorities' part." European news. Macedonia. Illegal mosques financed by Saudis springing up near you. Macedonia may need to follow Switzerland and ban the building of new mosques in the country. If the Swiss can do it and be applauded by the rest of Europe, why can't we? Mosques are springing up virtually overnight, illegally, with no building permits of any kind, and in almost every case the mosques are financed by Saudi, Kuwaiti, Malaysian, Qatari or Libyan organisations, in many cases by these foreign governments. Small bomb targets Greek far-right party office in Piraeus. A small bomb has exploded outside the local offices of a Greek extreme right-wing party in Piraeus, the port of Athens, causing no injury and minor damage. It was the second attack of its kind in 2 days, targeting the Golden Dawn party, which rose from the margins of Greek politics to enter parliament last year. Police said the device detonated around 9 p.m. local time Wednesday, damaging the door of the unoccupied 7th floor office. Nobody claimed responsibility for the attack. Also Wednesday, an anarchist group calling itself Angry Brigade claimed responsibility for a similar attack a day ago in the city of Larissa. No injuries were reported in that attack either. Golden Dawn has repeatedly been accused of violence against immigrants, which it has denied. Frenchman self-immolates over unemployment benefits. An unemployed man died after setting himself on fire in front of an employment agency in France's western city of Nantes, police said yesterday. He had threatened to do so after losing unemployment benefits. French Communist Party drops hammer and sickle. The most widely recognised symbol of communism worldwide, the hammer and sickle, will no longer appear on French Communist Party membership cards. The party faithful are worried the decision bodes ill for a party with deep roots in France. Germany. Muslims plan to convert Hamburg church into mosque. Muslim plans to convert a former Lutheran church in the city of Hamburg into a mosque is generating controversy across Germany, according to GateStone-Assigninstitute.org. From Berlin to Dortmund to Mönchengladbach, the gradual proliferation of mosques housed in former churches reflects the rise of Islam as the fastest growing religion in Germany. In the most recent case, the church would be the first converted into a mosque in the second largest city in Germany. Hamas MPs in groundbreaking Bulgaria visit. A Hamas parliamentary delegation of 3 MPs arrived in Bulgaria on Wednesday in a groundbreaking visit to a European Union member state, a delegate told AFP. We arrived today in Bulgaria on our first official visit, and we will meet with state officials, MPs from the ruling party and the opposition to discuss cooperation and explain the Palestinian cause, MP Ismail Al-Ashkar said by phone from Sofia. The EU lists Hamas, which controls the Gaza Strip, as a terrorist organisation. Members of the militant group last year visited non-EU member Switzerland to attend a hearing by a committee of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, drawing harsh criticism from Israel, and then Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman calling the IPU invite an example of international hypocrisy. Ashkar said the trip to Bulgaria came in response to an invitation from cultural institutions which had set up several meetings as well as lectures at universities. There will be similar visits to foreign countries soon, he added, without giving further details. The Hamas trip comes in the wake of February the 5th announcement by Sofia that the Lebanese Hezbollah, like Hamas, is an enemy of Israel with strong ties to Iran, was behind a July bombing in Bulgaria that killed 5 Israeli tourists and their local driver. I now hand you over to Nick Griffin, MEP.
To many of you, this week was mainly a white one, with another cold spell showing yet again that the global warming predictions of just a few years ago were completely wrong. Back in the year 2000, climate alarmists such as the Met Office's Hadley Centre filled the news media with the claim that, quote, children in Britain and Western Europe would grow up scarcely knowing what snow was, unquote. Their predictions were, they told us, based on complex computer modelling, which allowed them to predict with certainty that man-made global warming was already giving Britain warmer than normal winters and would virtually banish snow from our islands in the near future. This was one of the main propaganda sticks used to beat people into accepting the 2008 Climate Change Act, by which Labour, Lib Dem and Tory MPs alike voted almost unanimously, with only 2 MPs opposing the lunacy, to deindustrialise Britain and saddle British taxpayers and electricity users with a bill of £18 billion every year. Unfortunately for the alarmists, however, their predictions are not in fact based on scientific reality, but on wishful thinking and generous research grants, all prompted by a drive to use the imaginary threat from carbon dioxide, in fact nature's most important fertiliser, as the excuse to herd us towards one world government under the bankers' socialism of the United Nations. Our traditional unpredictable weather, however, promptly set about showing that the predictions of the AGW hoaxers were, to put it mildly, questionable. How, for example, could the warmists explain the extremely harsh winter of December 2010? In 2011, a Met Office team headed by Julia Slingo attempted to do just that in their 153-page paper, Climate, Observations, Projections and Impacts. Claiming that warming was continuing apace, they concluded that their earlier predictions were still correct. Global warming was still making British winters warmer, and if it hadn't been all for the carbon dioxide that, for example, our hospitals each had to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds a year to be allowed to emit, then December 2010 would have been even colder. So, as recently as 2011, it was business as usual at the Met Office, with Britain still on course to become a virtually snow-free zone. Then came last winter, and this winter, both of which piled more snow both on us and on the threadbare credibility of their man-made global warming claim. Research grants are threatened. The public's patience with the taxes, electricity bills, and the desecration of some of our most beautiful landscapes by wind farms is wearing thin. The plot to use carbon credits as the currency and income of the UN's New World Order is unravelling. But never fear, the propagandists in scientist coats at the Met Office have the answer. You'll probably have noticed the first part of the trick already, with the BBC and their other media partners in crime dropping the hostage to fortune phrase global warming and substituting the conveniently vague concept of climate change. This allows any unusual weather to be blamed on the carbon emitted from your patio heater or drive to work, which must therefore, of course, be taxed even more. The second part is their latest discovery, that the warming of the world, that hasn't actually now happened for 16 years anyway, has in the last few years given us a string of unusually snowy winters, because warmer weather in the Arctic leads to a shift in high altitude wind patterns that force the jet stream to shift, allowing colder air to sweep over Britain and thus increase the amount of snow in our average winter. So the warmer the world gets, the whiter our British winters are going to be. This 180-degree U-turn on their position 13 years ago is neither mentioned nor explained. The computer models that were used to justify the Climate Change Act were obviously drastically wrong. But don't worry, the new ones are now perfect. Keep paying your taxes, suckers. While your week may well have been white, mine was green. A green week in EU terms is one set aside for MEPs to spend time in their home country, to give them a few days in which to visit constituents. Many MEPs use it to dodge the snow and ice caused by global warming and go to play spotting wealthy constituents doing the same in the posh bits of Lanzarote or the Seychelles. I spend it on the road all over Britain, visiting local teams who are now distributing quantities of leaflets in support of my various campaigns, such as Save Our Seals and Public Inquiry Now into the establishment's failure on the grooming issue. I've also used the time to speak at a series of regional meetings, addressing in total hundreds of members and new supporters. Quite a few will have been there in person, or will come over the next few days, for I'll be in the northwest all this weekend, to hear what I'm saying about how, thanks to the failures, betrayals and fraud of the Westminster parties, popular disillusionment with politics is now so great that we can only prove that the British National Party is different and decent through a radical change of approach. We have to develop ways to win voters over, not with what we say, but with what we do. My speech about this will be released online once the tour is over, in conjunction with a series of leaflets and practical guides on how we can turn the concept of not words, but good deeds into positive and practical reality. So I'll say no more about it for now, not least because I'm on a very tight schedule, so I have to keep this broadcast short and sweet. And what's sweeter than to be able to conclude on the news that the condemned government has thrown in the towel in the case of brave BNP bus driver Arthur Redfearn. He's the one who, back in 2004, was sacked from his job for the crime of being elected to represent his local community as a BNP councillor in a suburb of Bradford. Arthur challenged his sacking by privatised public services giant Serco. He won first, but lost the case when Serco appealed. Arthur was scandalously refused leave to appeal to a higher court in England, so had to take his case to the European Court of Human Rights instead. There, last year, he won, thereby securing the right of people sacked for their political beliefs to claim unfair dismissal, even if they've only been with their employer for a short period of time. The liars of the controlled media tried to downplay the significance of this victory for free speech and true democracy by suggesting that the government would appeal. But this week, the government spokesman in Parliament announced that, quote, having considered the judgment, the government has decided not to appeal this decision. To bring our legislation into line with the ruling, we tabled an amendment to the Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Bill currently before the House of Lords, unquote. The amendment confirms that from now on it will be illegal to sack anyone on the grounds of political opinion or their political affiliation. The change will come into effect 2 months after the bill receives royal assent. Thus it will shortly be the law of the land that we are all entitled to be members of the British National Party, or any other party for that matter, and to stand in elections and get elected, and that anyone who tries to sack or discriminate against anyone for doing so will be acting illegally. This is a truly historic victory in the battle for freedom in Britain. Once again, our thanks and congratulations are due to Arthur Redfearn, who will now be able to go on to claim compensation and damages for what Serco and the government put him through for nearly 10 years. We, for our part, will be examining the question of where this leaves the purported ban on our members being employed in the prison service and the police force. That will take time, but, on the face of it, the government is skating on very thin ice. Meantime, if you, or anyone you know, have ever been sacked or discriminated against on account of your political beliefs or affiliation, you should either contact head office or a decent solicitor. Arthur Redfearn won't be the only one now able to push for justice and compensation. Everyone who is entitled to launch such an action should do so, because this is a famous victory that must be followed up, not just for the individuals directly affected, but because any attack on the freedom of any British citizen is an attack on us all, and on the memories and legacy of those countless heroes and heroines of past generations who rotted in prison or gave their lives on the battlefield in order to win and to defend our traditional freedoms. So raise a glass to them, to Arthur Redfearn, to the BNP, and to our British future.
Thank you, Nick, and I'm sure we can all join you in congratulating Arthur and hope he puts in for very substantial compensation. World News. Pat Robertson claims Islam is demonic and not a religion, but an economic system. Controversial Conservative Christian Pat Robertson doubled down Tuesday on claims that Islam is not a religion. According to right-wing watch, Robertson, an elder statesman of the evangelical movement, made the inflammatory claim during an episode of his TV programme, The 700 Club. Every time you look up, these are angry people. It's almost like it's demonic that is driving them to kill and to maim and to destroy and to blow themselves up, Robertson said of Islam. It's a religion of chaos. He went on to say, I hardly think to call it a religion. It's more of, well, it's an economic and political system with a religious veneer. A huge section of roofing, covering part of the defunct nuclear power plant at Chernobyl, has collapsed under the weight of snow. Officials immediately denied any threat of radiation, even though the accident involved a cover on part of the workings of reactor number 4, which exploded in 1986 in the world's worst atomic disaster. There are no safety hazards. The radiation situation at the plant and in the exclusion zone is normal. No one was hurt, said the administration at the former Soviet plant. There is no threat to the lives or health of the population, said a statement from Russia's Emergencies Ministry, echoing Ukrainian assurances. The snow piling up on the roof of the turbine hall caused part of the roof and some of the new panels to collapse, he said. As for the state of the shelter facility, it's stable. It will remain the way it has been. There are no radiation consequences of this emergency. The main consequence is that all these holes will have to be patched up. Muslim infiltration in public education. This type of propaganda fosters an environment of hate, loathing and a resentment towards Western culture, Christians, Jews, Shiites, secular Muslims and non-Muslims. Bridget Gabriel, ACT, for America. If you thought the UN, International Baccalaureate, Federal No Child Left Behind and Federal Common Core educational schemes were bad enough, you might want to look a little deeper. In the light of the attacks on and after 9/11, you would think the current administration would use a little prudence if they were sincerely concerned about a radical Muslim threat. When Obama took his oath of office, he instead defied America in numerous ways. He has given $1.5 billion to Muslim-led Egypt in foreign aid shortly after the Muslim Brotherhood declared war on the United States. He has now offered them 16 F-16s and 200 military tanks. This is the same man that said America is no longer a Christian nation, though it is, followed by a reference that America may be described as a Muslim nation. Interestingly enough, in recent years, American public schools have been indoctrinated with the Muslim religion. Studies have shown over 500 historical errors in public school textbooks, giving an Islamic slant to our youth. A World Date writer commented, It is well known that Saudi Arabia has contributed huge amounts of money to US learning centres, including universities, so obviously promoting Islam by means of financial aid. Egypt, major tourism decline due to acts of violence. Minister of Tourism Hisham Zazu said that the tourism industry is the most affected sector due to events that Egypt is currently witnessing, which affect Egypt's image abroad, thus negatively affect number of tourists coming to Egypt and cancel flights. In statements the minister made on Monday, in the sidelines of a conference on tourism and incentive to revive it, which Cairo hosts in participation of representatives of some states, he said that he would have to discuss with Turkey the reasons for postponing its flights, scheduled to start in March, and have been postponed to next September. Zazu added that he will also visit Milan Tourism Exchange to persuade the organisers of these flights to resume their flights, citing stability in touristic cities such as Sharm el-Sheikh and Hurghada. Thought for the day, our nearest and our dearest. Today I'm going to make my thought on how we Brits treat our nearest and dearest and the effect that massive immigration has had on the culture and thought processes of our society regarding the elderly. Now it must be pointed out that in the Islamic culture, which seems to be the way that we are heading, rather like the Titanic and the iceberg of which you could only see a very small portion, they would seem to place more respect at the feet of the elderly. Now individually of course I can't comment, but generally it is our old people who are shuffled about and finally shuffled off this mortal coil. I blame Western society today, immigration and governmental greed. The first is because we do not value the elderly or the past their sell-by dates persona now. They've no place in this rush-about celeb and reality TV culture or the PC media. Also, for the most part, especially in the so-called new middle classes, the nouveau poor, the elderly have no respect from their children or their grandchildren. I say this in particular time frame because it is that generation, baby boomers and 20 years on, that have the elderly parents and sometimes grandparents still around. The so-called working classes, the ones who have stuck around their roots, have usually been better at looking after their ageing relatives. Rather like other, sometimes third world cultures, they have them often round the house for years, bless them, tottering around, deaf and sometimes not on this planet, but looked after. No, it is the newly arrived 1 to 2 generations with middle class leanings that aspire to sending their parents into homes. After all, there is an extensive advertising on TV to spot the person with dementia, urging their relatives to seek out signs of degeneration, so either they can be heavily and expensively medicated or expensively put into what is laughingly called care. Now, I have had dealings with care homes, and for the most part my dealings with private care homes have been disastrous with my mother, but I will not go into that now as I'm trying to remain ambivalent. Suffice to say that dignity for the elderly in the male was too late for her, as were my conversations with the lady who inspired it way back in the latter part of 2004. But I will say that to my knowledge, and having 2 relations that work around care, one specialising in the elderly, that immigration and ensuing governments have played part in the demise of care homes in general. Most private care homes have been sold from family-owned to business-owned, and by business I mean many into the Asian money-making network or big business conglomerates. This does not make for a happy marriage or retirement. Many relatives of many elderly people will be exhorted to enter their loved ones into an EMI home, that is elderly mentally infirm for the uninitiated. So even if one's relative is suffering from being doped up too much from the NHS or just forgetful, put him into one of these places and they will provide either the state with the money, or if private, and most of them are, their entire pensions and probably the houses they lived in as well. I was recommended one of these privately owned places when my mother had been so experimented upon and doped up for 6 weeks she could barely talk. She couldn't walk because they tied her to a bed in a private ward because they were short-staffed. But I digress. Her so-called private specialist, an Egyptian, recommended a Muslim pal who owned such a home in Surrey. We went to see it and were appalled. The place was virtually open to the public. A retard in a white uniform showed us to what would be her room. It consisted of a small white space with bars on the window and a single iron bed, table with a lamp, and that was all. All for the princely sum of hundreds of pounds a week, and also, being Muslim owned, the state heavily subsidised it as well. It might as well have been a prison. In fact, prisons are now better catered for than the majority of elderly EMI homes or ordinary care homes. When I'm much older, of course, I intend to go to prison and have the life of Riley and not pay a penny for it. Suffice to say, my mother did not go into this cage, but that is another story. No doubt this man made millions from this endeavour into our medicated elderly, and you might wonder why I don't trust the Muslim culture. There you have it. They stick together at the cost of us Brits in this country. Our elderly are expendable when it comes to the last days of their lives, and unfortunately often their families think along the same lines. Now, I'm not condemning all families with this. Even I fell by the wayside when it comes to noticing or doing anything about what you do notice. I never had an elderly relation. There was only ever my mother and I, and she seemed eternally young until she wasn't. But whereas one has come to expect third world levels of care, mainly because 30 years ago it was usually our own stupids or cruels who intimidated and abused the elderly, successive governments and health authorities have deemed it necessary to import vast quantities of semi-qualified so-called nurses into the caring communities, and they have flocked to the private homes because of their greed. Those who come used to be mainly Filipinos. Many of the Filipinos I've met in the caring industry have been anything but caring. They come here for money and retraining and then sometimes on to America because they earn even more over there. Now there is a threefold disaster here in the UK. First, we're encouraging these people to leave their own country and their own elderly to the whims of whatever, and secondly, we're using NHS funds to retrain and pay them whilst doing it, and thirdly, for those who don't leave the UK, of course, they are marrying and breeding and benefiting. Many spoke or understood virtually no English and could be seen happily chattering away in their mother tongue in a corner of the room while some poor old bugger needed changing, wanted water or was just in distress. I have seen old people not dressed below the waist and sitting out in public. I have seen meals being put down, no effort to feed the old person, and then taken away. I have seen jewellery and items disappear from private rooms. I have seen old people never taken out, talked to or walked around. The one thing you never see is the money that is paid for the privilege of dying unseen and unheard. For what these old people don't eat, the cost of care is pathetic and greedy in the extreme. If a care home near you changes hands from a family-owned to Asian or other business, beware. The so-called cutbacks will be appalling. And if you complain, forget it. The CQC inspection used to be within 3 weeks of notifying the care home in question. What it is now, I don't know. Successive governments bleat on about the elderly and the need for euthanasia and the right to die. Soon, about the time I qualify, they'll bring in Soylent Green and you'll be eating me in one form or another. The indigenous elderly of this country are under threat from council and state busybodies who want their homes for immigrants. Where do you think this new bedroom tax originated? Many not so spring chickens have worked hard all their lives to have a home paid for, not just walked into this country and assumed it is their Allah-given right to have a home provided. And yet our authorities give more credence to these newcomers because they breed than to our silver foxes who have contributed in more ways to this country than the present generation. We're always being blasted by the tales of a growing increase in the numbers of elderly people who will need looking after and paying for, and yet the irony is that it is the elderly of this country who have been paying for the immigrants and their progeny for many years. The mantras of ageing populations, low breeding of Brits and whites, economic necessity of bringing millions of third world people in, all ring bells in the nationalists' heads. Why? Because much like a certain aspect of global warming, it's big business and globalisation behind it. Even the devious and mercurial minds behind the Bilderberg Group, the Frankfurt School, the School of Common Purpose and the extreme Zionist and US movers and shakers, and of course the sodding European Parliament, need reasons to bring in hordes of unwanted migrants from outside Europe and America into these countries. So communism has failed in the real world, the euro has failed in Europe, the bankers have buggered up the banking systems, greed and stupidity in both the US and the UK gave mortgages to people who could never pay them back, so what reasonable propaganda could they initiate that would sound all-encompassing and concerned, and of course must sound non-racist and politically correct? Age and numbers, that is what. What do the powers that be ever do but attack the weak? That is where the third world cultures and Islam especially fit the picture. They breed like it's going out of fashion and they keep their elderly safe, thus benefiting from their wisdom and knowledge. Now this fits the bill as far as our authorities go. They will continue to feed our indigenous young with a hatred for their own old people and a total disregard of what used to be ordinary human concern, because it will suit them in their common purpose of ethnic cleansing of this country. Our old people are classed along with the challenged and the retards, to be ignored or made money out of, to be attacked or killed, and generally thought of as expendable. We, as British National Party members, must look after previous generations, as they looked after us for the most part. No one is perfect, but remember, growing older is a benefit, because the alternative is death, and a government, council or state that disregards its older citizens will do the same to the younger citizens when their time comes. I personally am all for mummification. I want to be mummified, preferably when dead, and brought out by my family, Christmas and birthdays, weddings and the odd future British National Party meeting. Remember, gather ye rosebuds while ye may, the rot may set in any day. And finally, something fishy going on. Antidepressants contaminating rivers make perch antisocial. A study carried out in Sweden found that the relatively low concentrations of benzodiazepines commonly found in rivers throughout Europe, including Britain, can significantly affect the behaviour of the European perch. Significant amounts of benzodiazepine drugs called oxapam, which is widely used to treat anxiety, are being flushed into the rivers from sewage works. They can be excreted from the body intact and persist in the treated effluent water released from sewage works into rivers, scientists have said. The concentrations are too low to be considered a health risk to humans, but a study has shown they can still affect fish. The scientists found that perch exposed to extremely small concentrations of oxazepam, as low as fraction of a microgram per litre of water, were less sociable, bolder and ate faster than fish who were not exposed to the drugs. The scientists believe the subtle behavioural changes seen under experimental conditions indicate how the wider freshwater ecology could be affected by this kind of hidden environmental pollution. They said that the pharmaceutical compounds released into the aquatic environment might pose a greater problem than hitherto realised, and that more should be done to degrade the chemicals before being released into the treated effluent water from the sewage works. The solution to this problem isn't to stop medicating people who are ill, but to try to develop sewage treatment plants that can capture environmentally hazardous drugs, said Jörka Fick of Umeå University in Sweden, who was part of the team. This presenter thinks that we in the UK are every bit as much dependent on antidepressants as they are in the US, which is a much bigger country and not so overcrowded as the UK. It stands to reason that whatever we have over here is going to impinge more on nature than a larger landmass. Some people rely too much, as do GPs, on giving out pills to all and sundry who are feeling a bit low. If you never feel depressed, how do you know when you're feeling happy? There again, a way of dumbing down a generation of us Brits. Give them a pill, even better now it passes on to the poor fish. If we eat them, is it double dosing? You've been listening to The World at 8. I would like to thank Nick on his tour today and our European reporter who, despite being in recovery from a car crash, still gives us great news. I'm Lynn Mozart and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend. The French Front National and former French presidential candidate will be speaking at a debating society at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, February the 19th. A World at 8 writer comments, "That's fine and dandy, but why is our chairman Nick Griffin continually denied the Oxford debate, question time and other airtime? Ms Le Pen has voiced very similar views. This reeks of duplicity on our authorities' part." European news. Macedonia. Illegal mosques financed by Saudis springing up near you. Macedonia may need to follow Switzerland and ban the building of new mosques in the country. If the Swiss can do it and be applauded by the rest of Europe, why can't we? Mosques are springing up virtually overnight. QC, Principal Legal Advisor to the Director of Public Prosecutions, said she had reviewed a decision not to prosecute Mr Lavelle following allegations made against him in 2011. She said, "I have very carefully reviewed the evidence in this case and I have concluded that there is sufficient evidence and it is in the public interest to charge Michael Robert Turner with a number of sexual offences. I have authorised Greater Manchester Police to charge Mr Turner with 19 offences, including rape of a child. Mr Turner has now been charged with criminal offences and has a right to a fair trial." Catch me if you can. Violent criminal on the run from police taunts officers on Facebook with string of pictures of him breaking the law. A violent thug who is on the run from police has been poking fun.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 15th of February. Coronation Street star charged with child rape. Catch me if you can. French far-right leader to speak in Cambridge. Macedonia, illegal mosques financed by Saudis springing up near you. Small bomb targets Greek far-right party office in Piraeus. Frenchman self-immolates over unemployment benefits at their attempts to catch him on Facebook, saying, "Catch me if you can." Fugitive Alan Watkins, 24, began taunting officers after an urgent appeal for information as to his whereabouts was posted on Gwent's police's Facebook page. Watkins even posted this appeal on his own page, boasting, "Wow, I'm on the Gwent police site. You catch me if you can. Do your effing job." As well as his mocking posts, Watkins has also posted a picture of himself apparently urinating upon a police car. A nationalist spokesperson states, "What a charmer." French far-right leader to speak in Cambridge. The leader of a far-right party and the editor of a broadsheet newspaper have been added to the Cambridge Union's lineup. Marine Le Pen, MEP, leader of Germany, Muslims plan to convert Hamburg church into mosque. Nick Griffin, MEP, on climate change, the Green Week and Arthur Redfearn. Pat Robinson claims Islam is demonic and not a religion but an economic system. Muslim infiltration in public education. Thought for the day, our nearest and dearest. And finally, something fishy going on. UK News. Coronation Street's Michael Lavelle charged with child rape. Michael Turner, aka Michael Lavelle, Coronation Street, Kevin Webster, faces 19 charges relating to sexual offences committed between 2001 and 2010, and charges include the rape of a child. Alison Levitt